Hello everybody, my name is Sean, and today I'm talking about a legendary Filipino folk rock band that is still heard all around the Philippines today, due to their hopeful lyrics that encourage leaving a better world for our children, as well as their use of traditional Filipino instruments along with their Western pop rock influences. A lot of the information in this video comes directly from the co-founder of the band, Noy Pillora. So join me to learn about the fascinating band, Asin. The first formation of Asin goes back to the end of 1976, when Mike, Nonoy, Pillora Jr. met Cesar, Saro, Bañares Jr. at Brick Chimney Folk House near the schools that they attended. Cesar, who I will call Saro, was in his second year as an architecture student at University of Santo Tomas, and Mike, who I will call Noy, was in his last year of high school at the University of Manila. These two Ilonggo speakers bonded over their love of drinking and aspirations to be folk singers, and they soon started performing together under the name Mike and Cesar. They would perform songs by bands like America and Simon and Garfunkel, and after about a year, they felt the need for a third member to fill the missing middle voice. They tried out some of their friends, but nothing seemed to fit. Soon enough, they met a woman with an incredible voice named Lolita Nene Carbon, and she and Saro started dating and quickly fell in love. Lolita grew up in a house in Manila that was filled with instruments, and she began practicing at an early age, even winning a live radio contest at the age of 10. At 13, she joined the Philippine Navy Band, and as she aged, she joined several groups throughout her life and really honed her skills as a singer. As Lolita and Saro started spending all of their time together, it became clear that they should try her out as the third member of the group. Noy had already come up with a band name Salt of the Earth, and when the three of them were drinking together and listened to Joan Baez cover the Rolling Stones sing Let's Drink to the Salt of the Earth, they knew it was a perfect fit for the band. They would perform songs by groups like Peter, Paul, and Mary and started playing more reputable gigs. In 1978, Tony Ocampo from Vicor Records witnessed them perform and quickly signed them up. They switched their name to the Tagalog form of Asin ng Lupa, but the record label thought that was too long and not memorable enough, and asked them to go by Asin. Unfortunately, like so many musicians, they were given a standard contract, and they were so excited to sign it, not knowing that they weren't going to get paid very much at all for their compositions, and that all of their compositions were going to be owned by the record label forever. Around the same time that they met Tony Ocampo, they also met Fred Pendong Aban Jr. While Saro spent all of his time with Lolita, Noy quickly became good friends with Pendong. Pendong's group, Keith and Fred, was starting to fizzle out, and his eyes were set on Asin for the next group that he wanted to join. So once Asin was testing out their sound in the studio, Pendong was invited to play bass. At this time in the Philippines, it was typical for musicians to just take English songs and convert them into their native language, but Saro had been inspired by his brown bathwater in Mindanao to write a song about saving the environment. The record label was impressed, and Masdan Mo Ang Kapiligiran was the first song recorded by the group. It was sold as a single, with another song written by Saro as the B-side. The B-side, Sayang Ka, had a lyric that encouraged artists not to imitate, but always to create, and Noy had felt it was a personal insult to himself and started writing the song Todok. Their first single quickly made it to jukeboxes all around the country and was soon followed up by a song by Lolita, Pag-Ibig. Bayan ko naan ka, ako na yo'y nag-iisa, nais kong magbalik sa iyong bayan ko. The album, Masdan Mo Ang Kapiligiran, was released in late 1978 and explored social and political themes with a positive outlook on how we can strive for a better future. Though they did not consider themselves to be a political band, these types of themes will continue throughout their albums. This would also be the first time that Western-influenced folk rock would be mixed with traditional Filipino instruments. The band, with Pendong, laid down the groundwork, and the record label provided instruments like violins over certain songs. The band often sings harmonies in different combinations and would take turns singing lead vocal sections. All of the songs on this album were written by the three members, aside from Anak by Freddie Aguilar, which the label insisted that they include. Lolita also sang a version of Anak in Japanese, and pictures of her by herself were used on the cover of the Japanese release, as if the record label were trying to make her into a solo artist. Noy had not been consulted about this beforehand and already felt the trust waning between the three members. The people were inspired by the lyrics, and from my understanding, at this time in the Philippines, you couldn't leave your house for more than a few hours without hearing Asin somewhere. They were playing in jeepneys and taxis and restaurants and stores. Anywhere you go, somebody is playing an Asin record. The trio quickly rose to being the most famous Filipino group in the country. In late 1979, Asin released their second album, Himig ng Pag-Ibig. It is largely a stylistic continuation of the first album and featured the song Himig ng Pag-Ibig, which one website claimed to be the favorite Pinoy love song of all time. Another highlight from this album includes Balita, which continues to call out the oppression and sadness that the country was facing under the dictatorship of the Marcos regime. The album ends with a fantastic track that reflects traditional Filipino folk music, with chanting voices and using only indigenous instruments. While the first album was primarily written by Saro, with Lolita only contributing one song and Noy contributing two, this album has 2 songs by Lolita, 3 by Saro, and the rest were written by Noy and Pendong. While feeling despaired from being in a contract that barely paid them for their work, they released their second album to fulfill their contractual obligations. Then, shortly afterwards, Saro and Lolita broke up, and so did the band. Quick break to ask you to take 2 seconds to click the like button. I spent hundreds of hours researching this video, spent money to travel to another island, and even used a translator app to read an entire book in Tagalog. So if you could just take 2 seconds to click the like button and consider subscribing to see my interview with Noy and what band I'm going to talk about next. Thank you very much, and back to the video. After the band parted ways without much of a goodbye, Saro went back to his home of Cotabato, and Noy and Pendong created a band called Todok for a short while before Noy went back to Bacolod, where he studied engineering. In 1981, Lolita made a comeback with what may potentially be the first reggae song out of the Philippines, Usok by Lolita and the Boys. All of the band members fiddled around with different bands for a time, including Lolita having a fair amount of success with a reggae band called Sulabama. The people of the Philippines were inspired by the hopeful messages of Asin, but also rumors went around that the dictatorship is the one that cut their voices silent. In 1983, a group of business students on the island of Cebu made it their project to try to reunite Asin for one concert at the Cebu Coliseum. This resulted in a sold-out show, and their record label immediately contacted them, attempting to renew their contract. The group instead hired Noy's older brother Dindo to manage them so that they wouldn't be too stoned and sign into a horrible contract ever again. Dindo was enthusiastic about his role and hired a drummer and a crew to help the band tour around Mindanao. About a year after this new regrouping, Fred Pendong Aban Jr. was finally invited by Noy to become an official member of the group, and they released their third album, Himig ng Lahi. This album still sounds very much like classic, folky, and somewhat psychedelic Asin, but has a bit more variety, with some harder rocking pieces and even some country inspiration on one of the tracks. As a lover of progressive rock, my personal favorite song is Bantayob, which has multiple drastic changes and a tempo-increasing build-up that includes the Filipino percussive instruments kulintang. Another rocking piece that I really like is Magulang. Which I believe is about rebelling against your parents while still loving them. It was dedicated to Noy's friend Rocky, who had written some of the song's lyrics, but unfortunately died in a car accident. As Asin was still very popular, and the country had gone several years without hearing them, this album sold rapidly. It was certified gold within just a few weeks of release, and won awards for the Best Album of the Year in 1984. This is perhaps when Asin was at the peak of their fame, with highly anticipated concerts all around the country. After this, The band's record label, Ivory Records, wanted them to release an album of cover songs. Noy had the idea of gathering songs from all around the country in a way of uniting the different regions, and the result was 1984's Mga Awiting ng Bayan Kong Pilipinas. The majority of the album is a soft folk sound that continues what we expect from Asin, along with a few harder rocking pieces again, and some reggae inspirations, like heard in Waray Waray and Hahabol Habol. After that fourth album, Noy started traveling all around the Philippines in order to learn more about different tribes and the folk music that they create, as well as different instruments. I think he wanted for their next album to be entirely inspired by the Philippines, but his friends were reluctant to go that far, and though their next album does feature a lot of the indigenous Filipino instruments, it still incorporates a lot of Western sounds. Filipino folk elements come and go throughout this album, but a lot of it still consists of acoustic guitars and occasionally moments with electric guitar solos. The album was created shortly before the country had its revolution, and the lyrics reflect this time period. Forgive me for not understanding all of the lyrics or their context. I didn't live through the time, and nakakaintindi akong ng konting Tagalog lang. This video was a ton of work for me, and I'd really appreciate it if you could click the like button and consider subscribing to learn about more bands in the future and see my Noy interview that I'll be posting shortly. Thank you so much. The name of Asin's fifth album, Asin sa Atubiling Panahon, or Asin in a Reluctant Time, was inspired by the desire for change that was in the air, and the occurrence of the dictator's spontaneous election that he would rig in order to continue his reign. Because of Asin's ability to draw a huge crowd, the country's leader Marcos actually attempted to hire them to perform for him during his campaign. The band was basically told to name their price and that everything would be provided for them. They of course were not going to betray their principles, and they refused. When Marcos won his rigged election, millions of people in the Metro Manila area took part in the EDSA revolution in February of 1986. The freedom fighters would sing hopeful songs together, and obviously that included a lot of songs by Asin. The band's newly released album went unnoticed, and is extremely hard to find today. The only version I found online is very low quality, and it's a shame because it might be one of the band's best albums. With spirits low in this uncertain time, the band had all kinds of fights with each other, including an actual physical fight between Pendong and Saro on stage. Asin split up again until things were starting to normalize, and in 1988 they decided to give it another go. This time, however, Noy approached one of their former producers, Ed Formoso, with the idea of writing new songs that other inactive but famous Filipino musicians would come together and sing. Once the other members of Asin agreed to regroup, they were convinced that they would have even greater success if they let Ed Formoso be their manager. Ed Formoso seemed to forget about Noy's idea and allowed greed for a quick buck to take over. In 1988, they released two more albums of cover songs, Himig Kayumangi and its continuation, Sinta. Since these albums didn't come from the heart, they didn't leave a great impression. From my potentially biased understanding, Noy was the only one who really maintained his values and wasn't interested in using the name Asin simply to make money. At least from his perspective, this is the reason for his expulsion from the band at this time, potentially along with Ed Formoso's desire to expand on Noy's ideas, but take the lead in his own way. Once Noy was out of the picture, Ed Formoso created an all-star band called Lokal Brown. They released 2 albums and featured the other 3 members of Asin, along with the singer of a band called The Jerks, and some other Filipino artists, including Formoso himself, who composed at least the majority of the songs. Noy was off exploring the world when the rest of Asin broke up in 1990. Pendong created a group called Grupong Pendong, and Lolita released her solo album under the name Nene in 1991. The original 3 members without Pendong regrouped for one final concert in 1992. And when back together again, Saro proposed to Noy that the 2 of them could continue the name Asin without Lolita or Pendong. He also told Noy that he had never been informed that Formoso wanted to fire Noy, and that after Noy was gone, Pendong became the group's leader. The 2 did not continue the name, And unfortunately, 1 year later, on March 18th of 1993, Cesar Saro Bañares Jr. got into a fight at a karaoke bar in his hometown and was shot in the head and killed. Ed Formoso produced a tribute album to Saro titled Saro Sabato. It features a variety of different Filipino rock bands, though the first track is actually an unreleased recording by Saro himself that had been discovered on his computer after his death. Thank you for all your incredible songs and positive messages, Saro. You will never be forgotten. In the year 2000, a man from the UK attempted to once again reunite Asin. The 3 remaining members gathered on the beautiful island of Boracay, where Noy was living with his wife Ginji. Noy proposed coming back with 2 albums. The first one would consist of 4 songs from the Nene album, 4 songs by Grupong Pendong, and 4 songs that Noy had written with his wife, while the second album would be totally new compositions that the band created together. Money signs flashed on the eyes of his old friends, but Noy had become a successful businessman himself on Boracay and wanted the band to self-produce the albums. The other 2 didn't agree. They wanted a record label to take over, and Noy saw that they just weren't seeing eye to eye anymore. Noy decided to drop out of the project, but allowed Lolita and Pendong to continue to use the name Asin. Pag-Ibig, Pagbabago, Pagpapatuloy was released in 2001. Though the album mostly consists of songs written by Lolita and Pendong, it begins with an award-winning orchestral medley of many classic Asin songs, and ends with a new recording of the song that they had found on Saro's computer, Sa Malayong Silangan. Lolita and Pendong continued to perform together up until breaking up in the year 2006, which would be the same year that Noy and Ginji self-published an album under the name Noyginji Interaktiv. The content of the album finally sees Noy releasing music that is purely inspired by world music with minimal Western influences. Today, Lolita lives in Manila and occasionally plays concerts with a backing band under the name Lolita Carbon with Asin Band. After spending several years in Israel and some adventures to the US where he teaches Filipino children to play some of his old songs, Noy currently lives in his hometown of Bacolod, where I was able to interview him and see him perform his classic songs with his new band, Padayon. He hopes that someday this new group will compose and release new songs together. To learn more about Asin and other bands, please hit the subscribe button. Next week I'm going to be uploading my interview with Noy, and if you really want to get in depth, you can contact him yourself in order to buy his book that has the whole story. Thank you very, very much for watching. Please be sure to hit the like and subscribe button, and until next time, have a happy listening session.